I should walk at the sun. Look at that. Hiya. Nice to meet you. I'm Lianne. Hi, Chloe. Nice to meet you. I can put that to the side here because it might.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Just put it on the pad. That's all right. Make sure that it's
All of you. It's only one of me.
That's all right.
Right, on to you. It's quite difficult to know what success looks like in a job like this, because the main thing is always keeping going. You're there to serve a quite complex institution and keep it alive, and all being well, hand it on to your successor in reasonable working order. So the Church of England hasn't actually collapsed. The Anglican family across the world is still speaking to each other, just. But the things I look back on with most satisfaction are actually getting a proper international development network going in the Anglican Communion. And I think that's one thing I do think is a success, not for me, but for all of us who've been working on that. Completely, yes. And you don't try to be successful. You try to do what's right. You try to serve as best you can. But it's not as if you've got one great shining task you've got to do, and after that you say, yes, I've done it, succeeded. I suppose it's been really the two initiatives that I've tried to push through. One about planting new congregations in unlikely settings. We've had a big push on that, and I've had to raise some money for that, and that's been going for about 8 years, and something like 2,000 new small congregations have been created with help from that. And then there's this development network for the Anglican Communion, a sort of umbrella organisation that puts together the grassroots work on relief and aid that's being done by Anglicans across the world. And that's taken off so well, and such enthusiasm around the world, so that's something. And then I suppose I'd also say one or two of the foreign trips to Pakistan and to Central Africa, feeling that, not particularly because of anything I've done or said, but just being there and giving support to beleaguered groups, that matters a lot. I don't think I'd want to talk about being proud of it, because Canterbury has really been a place that's just fed me. I've been able to come here every couple of weeks usually, go and visit a parish or a project and feel, yes, this is the real ongoing life of the church. So, for example, contacts with what's now the Catching Lives programme for the homeless. Been involved with that for most of my time here in different phases of that project. These are the things that really matter to me most, and I feel that the church in this area is doing quite a lot in areas like that. But for me, yes, I won't say it's a relaxation coming here, because it's usually hard work, but it's a different kind of work and more in touch with people. Undoubtedly, the huge debate about sexuality in the Anglican Communion, an absolute circle squaring thing, with people deeply opposed, often very aggressive towards each other, and the knowledge that whatever one's own convictions, somehow you have to try and bring everybody along with everybody else and keep as many people at the table as possible. And again, that's been massively frustrating. You might want to talk about something else and it keeps coming back to that. Well, within the Church of England, of course we've had our own versions of some of these international squabbles, and now we're just about, I think, to come to the end of debate about women bishops. The end is in sight, I hope, within a month or so, month or two. That's not dominated everything, but it's been in the background as something that has to be sorted out, and I'll certainly retire happy if I can feel that that's settled when I move on. But I think there's also been a kind of ongoing set of issues around how the church looks and feels in society. We've had quite an aggressive atheist polemic against the church. We've had all sorts of discussions about the bishops in the House of Lords and the role of the church in public life. And I wouldn't say that that's a frustration, it's just been a challenge all the way through. But that's always been there. What does the church look like in the public eye? Almost everything, actually. I'll miss the cathedral itself, and I'll miss going to the cathedral in the very early morning when there's nobody else around. I'll miss the great Christian festivals here, and at Christmas the mixture of things that we do, like having parties for the choir boys and then going to help with lunch at the homeless centre and preaching to the prisoners in Canterbury Prison on Christmas morning, all of that. I'll miss that. I'll miss this city and so many people in it. Oh, actually, I miss Christ Church too. Being Chancellor is, in one sense, a bit of a nominal position. It doesn't give you any disciplinary role or decision-making role, but it's meant that I've been able to come in, I suppose, a couple of times a year, spend time with students, perhaps take a service in chapel, meet a group and take questions. For example, last year I came in and did a politics seminar one afternoon, that sort of thing. So not a lot, but just enough to make it a real relationship, and one that I've really valued. Apart from don't even think of taking the job, I think that one piece of advice would be keep in touch with the parishes. Go and visit, go and stick your nose in. Not to interfere, but just to get a sense of what life is like. And book in lots of school visits, because visiting schools is another of those really energising things, which I've loved doing. So those are two of the big ways of just keeping your feet on the ground in this, and remembering that the church actually goes on. Archbishops come and go, and something much more important keeps going. I enjoy the sheer human contact with children. I just enjoy working with children, always have done. I like the fact that you can never predict what questions will be, whether it's a 6-year-old or a 16-year-old. They ask different kinds of embarrassing questions. I like also seeing the way in which a really good school can be a nurturing community for people, and the dedication of so many teachers. It's just a sense of excitement and discovery and imagination, all these things, and especially when you're visiting schools in perhaps a rather deprived area, and you see the amazing difference that a good school can make. And I've seen so many of those, and it's wonderful. It's a very good question, because at one level it looks as if faith has less of a role. Secular perspectives get quite a lot of airtime, so to speak. The assumption that everybody's really Church of England isn't one you can make. We're more obviously diverse religiously and so on. And the voices of those who are critical of religion is pretty strong. At the same time, the number of people who still identify themselves as belonging to faith communities of one kind or other is enormously high. We're talking, if you put all the religious communities together, we're still talking 3/4 or more of the population who somehow feel they're connected, even if it's very distant. And we've had to face in the last 10 years the fact that religion is an element in global politics in a way we never expected to be before that. 9/11 and all that goes with that. I've seen, I think, a slight drawing in of people's horns in thinking creatively about education You know, the latest we see about plans for secondary education has just a touch about it. Let's get back to the 1950s, you know, when we knew how to do it. We knew where we were. We worked with exams and so forth. And although I don't think the new plans for GCSEs are lethal, I do think that underneath there is a kind of grumpy feeling that education's not what it used to be, and I sense a little bit of a loss of nerve there. The other thing that slightly worries me is the way in which the language of the deserving and the undeserving poor is coming back, because of the financial pressures, which I suppose is the biggest change in public. The sense that there isn't public money any longer, the sense that everybody's savings are at risk. Because of that, people are a bit defensive about those who are a bit worse off. They feel people on the next rung down are a bit of a threat. They're encouraged by some of the media to think in terms of welfare scroungers and bogus asylum seekers and all of that rhetoric. And there's a bit more of that, I think, than there was 10 years ago in some ways, and you sense there's more anxiety around. Not surprising in a financial crisis. The church isn't ever going to be a department of government. It's got its own agenda and its own authority, I'd say. So we can never be in a situation where either the church dictates to the state or the state dictates to the church. But there can be some quite good partnerships, and there can be some quite good arguments too. Take the arguments. We've had the arguments about the Iraq War, arguments about welfare cuts. And then we have the cooperation, and I was talking earlier this afternoon about something called the Near Neighbours Project, which is basically grassroots community action which the Church of England does with other faith groups. And in some areas that's a really powerful witness. And the government gave us some money for that, and we've had a very good relationship on that score. Eric Pickles came with me to visit some of the projects in East London a few months ago, and that was obviously working well. So there can be little local partnerships, but always I think the church reserves the right to say, come on, what about this, what about that? Yeah. I suppose I do, really. I find it really extraordinary that people worry about these things, because most of the people I know in other faith communities don't worry about it. The fact is that part of the furniture, the cultural furniture of this country, is provided by Christian history. You can acknowledge that without feeling pressure to be a Christian. And I think there's such a nervousness about that, as if somehow you're committing yourself to more than you want to be committed to if you talk about Christmas or whatever. And I just think that's so almost childish in a way. You recognise where you are and who you are. You say, yes, of course, this is a country where the calendar is formed by the way the Christian church has worshipped. Okay, that's where we are. Recognising that doesn't commit you, and denying it suggests that somehow you live in a place without any history. And that's a very dangerous place to be. It was really quite a privilege to be able to have private conversation with a very, very appealing and open young couple. And I don't imagine I gave them any advice they hadn't heard before, but that was quite special in a way, just having that personal contact. And the event itself was a bit like the Olympics, another of those occasions where cynicism can't cope, and people eventually give us, okay, all right, it worked, it was wonderful, damn it. And that's always good for us. Not really, actually. The cameras were quite properly controlled, I think. The shots were careful, distanced, discreet, but everybody behaved remarkably well. And no, I think people didn't see all the rest of it was behind the scenes, and the little private jokes in the vestry and in the chapel of St Edward afterwards. Well, being head of a college is a very different kind of challenge, but I think the kind of challenge it is can you create a sort of ethos for a college? Can you create a common spirit and common feeling? And a good head of a college, I think, does that. I would hope to do that. My predecessor at the college has obviously done it. But I'm also very interested in, especially in Cambridge, in terms of widening access and what we do to keep good relationships with schools up and down the country. And because I like visiting schools, I'd really rather like to keep up some school visits in the new job, and particularly some of the more deprived contexts. And also I'd like to write a book or two. Well, apart from the college work and whatever university teaching comes with it, I do want to keep up some connection with these development issues globally, and there are some possibilities to follow up there. But in terms of real spare time, I mean, not just non-university time, I suppose it's the sort of things we've always enjoyed doing as a family, you know, reading, theatre going, and music. I'd say try and find the best art, writing, music, whatever that's come out of a religious context, and ask, where does it come from? It doesn't come from nowhere. So the poetry of a George Herbert or a T.S. Eliot, the art of a Rembrandt, the music of a Bach or Mozart, or even, I don't know, I suppose Arvo Pärt or Taverner among modern composers. That's the world that religion helps to create. And I think I'd just say, ask whether that's a bigger or a smaller world, a richer or a poorer world, and start in from there.
Okay.
Oh dear, I'm afraid I don't.
On the spot a little bit,
I don't memorise them. I'm afraid, but yes, it's been an important part of my life for the last, gosh, I suppose since my school days, really. But like most people, I wrote terrible poems when I was a schoolboy, and it took me a while to get over it. But now I've published, what, 3 collections of poetry, and there's another one almost finished. It was W.H. Auden who I think made me think most deeply about poetry, because he's such a disciplined writer, such a disciplined writer. He counts the syllables, and even where it doesn't rhyme, the syllables and the shapes of verses are so carefully constructed. And that really brought me up short, and I thought, this is hard work. It needs concentration, and that really helped me turn a corner. Well, I always say to clergy when they're starting a new job, just remember you're a human being, and you need to feed your human life, not just your church life. And one of the sad things that sometimes religious institutions do to people is they squeeze some of the humanity out. I think what I've been trying to say is that, properly understood, there's more humanity rather than less in the religious life. And it doesn't always look like it, and you have to work at it. I was born into a moderately religious family. They weren't that committed, I suppose, but like a lot of families, when a child arrives, you perhaps try to make sure that the child grows up in a religious environment, and parents come back to church with that, and that was a bit of our story. I suppose when the children were small, we just took them to church. After a point, you can't force that. Our son still comes to church with us without any questions asked, at nearly 17. So you don't force it, you try to keep the door open, you try to answer the questions when they arise as honestly as you can. Well, thank you very much. Nice to meet you all. But, there must be a whole list of question. What just keep talking so they don't have an opportunity to answer. If you could